Good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle Maldonado, and I am Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs here at the university. More importantly, I am Byron's mom, who is one of your first-year fellow students sitting in the audience. So where's Byron? There he is. See, there he is waving. See, he owns it. If you want to come sit with your mommy during the talk, you can come up front. So, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2023 Ignatian Values in Action Lecture given by Dr. Tim Muldoon. We chose Living Against the Grain and invited Dr. Muldoon to campus to advance important goals of our university's strategic plan related to the humanities and faith, passion, and purpose, the student's journey. Through the lens of an accomplished theologian and philosopher, Dr. Muldoon offers in this book a field-tested strategies for those facing a time of transition and helping young adults discern their deepest desires and discover their true purpose in and for this world. His work is a vehicle for us to explore Ignatian values embedded in the universal apostolic preferences of journeying with youth and showing the way to God. Thank you, Dr. Muldoon, for your work and for sharing your wisdom with us this evening. The purpose of the Ignatian Values in Action Lecture is to introduce students and the larger community to the mission and core values of the university. Initiated in the fall of 2012, the lecture has brought speakers of international prominence here to speak about meaningful service to the world, particularly as understood within the tradition inspired by Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits. Each Ignatian Values in Action lecture is accompanied by a book called The Royal Read, which I know all of you have read. The Royal Read program at the university creates a shared experience for our first-year class through the reading of a carefully selected book. The lecture and the book work with common themes, ones that provide interesting points of discussion for your first-year seminars. So many people have worked extremely hard to make this event happen tonight. I want to thank Linda Walsh for her administrative support, not only for the lecture, but also for the first-year seminars as a whole. Where's Linda? She's in the back. She's hiding in the back, but I also want to thank the facility staff for setting up all of these chairs for us tonight, chairs that will also need to be broken down this evening. I would like to thank the staff from IT, who is here working during the evening, providing the technical support for our lecture. We truly appreciate the faculty that teach in our first-year seminars and contribute to the educational advancement of our mission. And finally, I would like to thank and introduce Dr. Hank Willenbrink, Associate Professor in the Department of English and Theater and coordinator of the first-year seminar.
Thank you, Dr. Maldonado. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to shout out to my first-year seminar classes, latest and greatest, because I know this might embarrass you slightly less than it embarrassed Byron. So hi, latest and greatest. Okay, thank you. Now that it's out of the way. It's my great privilege and pleasure to introduce Dr. Tim Muldoon, who joins us tonight as the author of Living Against the Grain. Dr. Muldoon is an associate professor in the practice of philosophy and theology, an associate professor of the practice, this is a long title, of philosophy and theology in the Perspectives on Western Culture program at Boston College. I find this title, Professor of the Practice, particularly apt for Dr. Muldoon. Those of you who may have spent time with this text will notice the breadth of references is long. St. Augustine, Alred of Ravelot, St. Ignatius, Gerard Manley Hopkins, Dorothy Day, two-time Ignatian Values and Action speaker Father Greg Boyle. And while Dr. Muldoon uses these voices to help us call to question what is our most authentic life, that questioning is only part of the mission. The other part is when Dr. Muldoon encourages his readers to engage in the practices of living authentically. Spend an hour in nature. Jot down the experiences that make you feel most alive. Think of a time when a work commitment or relationship prevented you from being present to someone. These are some of the next steps that Dr. Muldoon gives us. This list of calls to action goes on throughout the book, and the authentic life, of course, must not only be contemplated, it must be lived. In explicitly Ignatian terms, we'd call this contemplatives in action. But as the title of the book suggests, living against the grain, to do such a thing is not the norm. It cuts against many of the pressures around us and things that are accepted by a lot of people about the ways that we should be and the ways that we should act. So, in that spirit, and in the spirit of a Muldoon next step, I'm going to ask you to do something you've probably never done before, at least in a room of this size. First of all, take anything out of your pocket, phone or otherwise, that might beep, vibrate, or send a haptic signal, and put that on Do Not Disturb or silent. Yes, seriously, I'll do it with you. You with me? You already did it coming in, I know. All right. Once you're there, find a place to get comfortable and grounded in your seat. Take this place of stillness, and with me, take a nice deep breath in on the count of 4, and out on the count of 4. Thank you for putting up with that. And now let's give a big royal welcome to Dr. Tim Muldoon.
So my first question is, what was the opening band? Because you guys are amped up, and So go Royals! I love this place. Thank you, Dr. Maldonado. Thank you, Dr. Willenbrink. Thank you for welcoming me here to be in your presence and to share some thoughts with you for this evening. So now is when I do my shout out. Dan, where are you? Dan Olson. This is the moment where you get to raise your hand. He's the guy that I know here. Thank you, Dan. All right, there you are. You're welcome. This is in the category of how your Jesuit education has long-term consequences. His mom and I were classmates back in the day as undergraduates. Isn't that lovely? That's just nice. Yeah. So my task this evening is to invite you into something of the reflective space that Dr. Willenbrink just suggested to you. And I'm hoping that one result of this lecture is that you have perhaps a little bit of a greater sense of what kind of place you have chosen to make yourselves a part of. Obviously, you've gone through the college process. My own son is a freshman at another institution, and so I know something of just what kind of decision-making that entails. So here you are. You've entered this place for any number of reasons. And now the question I think that confronts many of you is, okay, so what do I do once I'm here? And I'm sure that many of you are in the mode of thinking, okay, there's kind of a checklist. There's certainly a rather long list of things you've got to accomplish before that day when you walk across the stage and receive your diploma. Now, I think most of us who are professors and administrators and members of the just the world of higher education hope that in the process there's something more that's going on, not just a series of things, kind of boxes that you're checking, but that there's some kind of experience that ignites something in you. That as a consequence of having been in a community like this one, that you will be a different person, that you will have discovered new things about yourself, that you will have encountered other people who challenge you, that you will encounter ideas that make you rethink perhaps even basic things that you take for granted right now. There's really something wonderful about education. Certainly those of us that do it for a living, at some point we're sitting where you're sitting and, listening to a guy on the stage drone on about this or that, but at some point something became awakened in us that said, this is special, and I'm a different person for having encountered these ideas, these people, this community. So our hope, and I say our because I am also an educator at another Jesuit institution, very much like the University of Scranton. Our hope for you is that you experience something of what we have experienced, something that has led us to say, yes, I have gifts, I wish to place them in service to others, and I wish to be part of creating more beauty in the world, creating greater harmony in the world, solving the world's problems, addressing the world's great needs. We want to release in you your greatest desires. And you might not even know what they are yet, but we want to help you to name them, to reflect on them, to live out of them, and to be willing to take the risks and face the challenges that move you in the direction of what you desire. So that's our hope for this evening. That's my hope for you. And with that, I'm going to kind of get actually into what I am going to be talking about. Many of you have at least seen the cover of the book. I know how this goes. Some of you have read it, some of you have not, and that's okay. Those of you that have read it will immediately recognize the kind of title of this slide. For those of you that have not read it, I hope that you'll kind of bear with me because I want to begin my remarks by having us enter into a kind of mode of contemplation of what the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins describes as selving. And I hope this will become clear as I share these images with you. The word comes from a poem that's at the top of the book, and I'll say in full transparency that the book came out of a course that I've taught at Boston College now for over a decade. I've taught it maybe 20 times or so. And in every single semester I've begun with this poem because I find it such a remarkable example of something that is very much at the heart of this educational enterprise that we describe as Jesuit education. And this word selving kind of crystallizes it from me. So I'll just kind of say before I share this poem with you that it's a verb and it comes from the word self. But Hopkins being this wonderful 19th century Jesuit poet who's memorialized in Westminster Abbey in Poets' Corner, one of the great poets of the English language, he was only too willing to take words and mess with them And so he messes with the word self, okay? Because we can all say, all right, I'm a self, myself. He wants to verb that noun. He wants to ask, what does it mean to selve? And he does that by presenting this series of metaphors that I want to share with you. And the first one comes from the image that you see before you on the screen. That is a kingfisher. It's a type of bird, and you can see it's just an absolutely beautiful, beautiful bird captured by this photographer just at this moment where it is it's just an incredible kind of action shot. But Hopkins observes the following: as kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. As tumbled over rim in roundy wells, stones ring. As each tucked string tells, each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue to fling out broad its name. Each mortal thing does one thing and the same, deals out that being indoors each one dwells, selves. Goes itself, myself it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me, for that I came. Dramatic pause. That's just the first stanza, by the way. It's written here on my hand. No, it's actually not. I have it committed to memory. Thank you. The question that I want to ask you, and that I want us to kind of contemplate for a moment is, what does it mean to selve? What does it mean to selve? All right, so he gives us this rich host of metaphors, of things that just are what they are. Okay, so the kingfisher, it's this gorgeous bird. It captures the imagination. The dragonfly, and I'm thinking sort of, on a summer's night, just as the last lights are kind of falling across a pond or a lake, and the dragonflies catch the last bit of light, and it's almost as if they're bursting into flame. He just says, something amazing is in this creature. Similarly, plucking a string on a harp or on a guitar, the string makes a sound. Similarly, a stone that you throw down a well, ping, 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 splash. These things do themselves. And remember, the line is, myself it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me, for that I came. Now, my question to you, ladies and gentlemen, is, when do you selve? See, you and I are rather different in the order of creation that Hopkins has put his finger on, because he recognizes that everything in creation does itself. And in his dramatic and beautiful vision as a young Jesuit, he comes to see the world as, in another poem, charged with the grandeur of God. Everything in creation does itself, and does itself, in many cases, beautifully. And yet he laments in this same other poem that even though there lies the dearest freshness deep down things, he recognizes that we are different. We human beings can tend to leave, in his words, a smudge on the world. Where's man's smell? The soil, he says, is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. We are rational creatures. So those of you that are taking your intro philosophy courses, are perhaps encountering the thoughts of the early Greeks who were wrestling with this question about how complex human beings are. A Plato who can say that we can have a rational part of our souls, but we can have this kind of desiring part that moves in any number of directions, upwards and downwards and sideways. And we can have this appetitive part, which just frankly wants to feed ourselves, drink, and satisfy our bodily desires. So he recognizes that we're complex creatures. And so as human beings, our selving is not quite as simple as that of the kingfisher, or of the dragonfly drawing flame, or of the stone pinging its way down into the bottom of a well. As human beings, we have the capacity to become compromised. What do I mean by that? I mean that we can be, as it were, seduced by the easy, the obvious, the low-hanging fruit. Here you are on a college campus. For many of you, it may be your first real experience of living alone, of having freedom, of making your own choices, of exercising your autonomy. And I will ask this as positively as I can. These are rhetorical questions. Have you allowed yourself to own the possibilities that exist here for you? Have you had some inkling of the kind of person you might become by allowing yourself to enter fully into what this very rich community has to offer to you? I am not naive. I've been in this education game for over 25 years, and so I certainly know that on some level, there's part of many of us that can just simply say, yay, I'm on my own, I get to do what I want. But I will even say this, those of you that have older siblings, that have friends in the upper classes, and see what they are doing, talk to them about the risks that they have taken along the way. Talk to them about the cost that it has been for them to maybe not do that extra thing that would have been fun, but instead giving themselves time to really sink deep roots into a paper that has elicited something in them. Or to do an extra hour of volunteer work because they find themselves compelled by the community that they serve. Or because they want to stay in the lab just that much longer because they've got a question that has not yet been answered. So here's, to me, the great challenge and promise. We are complex creatures, unlike the kingfisher, unlike the dragonfly. We have great promise. We also have great temptation. The promise is that in challenging ourselves and taking advantage of new experiences, that there is a part of us that we discover that we perhaps haven't even named yet. So again, my 3 questions on this next slide. How have you selved in the past? What has given you life? What has been for you an experience of self-discovery? Maybe it's a team you played on. Maybe it's an ensemble that you played with. Maybe it was a performance that you undertook. Maybe it was something in your family. Maybe it was something in your community. When have you selved? When have you had the experience of the discovery of self and the doing of an authentic self? When have you experienced that in the past? And then what about now? How are you doing it even now in these first few weeks of your semester? What are you discovering about yourself? even as you interact with others who are in that same place as you are. But the question that I really want us to think about is that last one: how will you selve? And to me, that's such a critical question because you are in an environment that many in the world would give their right arms to be part of. You are in a minority of the global population that has the opportunity to discover parts of yourself, to tap into your talents, to encounter those who bring out the best in you. And I just urge you to take advantage of that. This is all of us. This comes from the hand of the great Florentine Michelangelo. And I saw it when I was a junior in college. I was spending the year abroad. I had the opportunity to visit Florence and to go see the David because it's so Instagrammable. Actually, that's not true. There was no Instagram back then. It didn't exist. In fact, there was no internet. And we still lived. But I digress. I saw this statue on my way to seeing the David, and it froze me in my tracks because on some level I said to myself, that's me. What do I mean? I mean that what he gives us here is a sense of being almost entrapped within the rock. It's perhaps an apocryphal story, but the story goes that Michelangelo, when he was about to start a sculpture, he would take out his hammer and his chisel and he would yell, "Speak!" as if to draw a creature out of the marble. All of us are works in process. All of us have been formed in certain ways, through our families, through our schools, perhaps through our faith communities, perhaps through our civic communities. But we've all been formed, but we're not all there yet. And I say, the first person plural because I don't think I'm all there yet. So my question is, what is the direction of that ongoing formation? What might emerge as the sculpture that is you continues to be shaped and molded and formed? What will you look like as you continue to allow the chisel into the rock? And I'll even suggest it this way. Not all formation, not all experiences of coming into a developed self are comfortable, are easy. Some of them are difficult. Some of them are painful. Some of them are the grade I did not get on the exam, or the feedback from my professor that I was not expecting. The chisel does not always feel good. But to subject ourselves to the process by which a more and richer, authentic self emerges, that is what you have signed up for. And that is what we as educators hope for you. So the question, I think, becomes this: all right, I've signed up for it. Now what do I do? And so I'll provide you with the next compelling image for your consideration. My question there is, whom will you imitate? Whom will you imitate? Whom will you copy? The two images before you are 16th century Spanish knights, one fictional and one non-fictional, The one on the right, Don Quixote. Excuse me, it's the left. My right, your left, sorry. I almost mixed them up. The Man of La Mancha. The story, as I think most of you at least have an inkling of, if not a intimate knowledge of, is that this is the man who basically went kind of crazy and started imitating the great Amadis of Gaul, this shining figure of kind of Spanish folklore and legend. For those of you that are not familiar with that name, King Arthur might be a sort of similar vibe. And something interesting happens to Don Quixote, so he is, of course, going off on all of these adventures, sallying forth, chasing windmills and doing what crazy people do. But something else interesting happens. In trying to imitate Amadis of Gaul, he enacts, in many cases, this kind of beautiful posture of chivalry. And even on occasion, rather lifts others to see themselves with the kind of beauty that this knight Amadis would see in those with whom he interacted. So there's this wonderful interaction with this Dulcinea, who is rather struck by this. So the imitation in the case of Don Quixote is a little bit ambiguous. And I'll just leave it at that for now to talk about the other figure on the right. No, this is not the audience participation part of the evening. That is Ignatius of Loyola. And specifically, it is the young Ignatius of Loyola, when he too was a knight who desperately wanted to imitate the very same Amadis of Gaul as Don Quixote. And in Ignatius's case, and he wasn't even called Ignatius at the time, he was just young Iñigo, or in his native Basque, Inaki. He was just a soldier. He was just a guy that wanted to prove himself and do what young soldiers do, for good or ill. And those of you that know the story know that what happens is that he makes a very foolish decision when leading a battalion in a war, or a battle really, against the French at Pamplona. Cannonball shatters his leg. He is laid up in convalescence for weeks and months, and thinks his life is over. Thinks that everything that he desired had come to a crashing halt. Now, we have the luxury of knowing the rest of the story, which is that it is during that period that he has time to reflect, has time to contemplate, has time to basically think about his life. He reaches for the only reading material available to him, the lives of the saints, the life of Christ. And he decides, you know what, when I try to imitate the knights, I get anxious. When I try to imitate Francis of Assisi and Jesus, it makes me feel better. And so he decides, I'm going to imitate those characters. And that's effectively the kernel of the story that leads to his founding the Society of Jesus, which found Jesuit universities starting in Messina, Sicily, in the mid-16th century, and these same Jesuits eventually land right here in Scranton. So there's a straight line, okay? But the question is, whom will you imitate? And to me, this is a consequential question I think there's a lot we could draw from these two examples, but I'll just kind of focus in on one or two observations. The first is that it was an experience of thinking everything was over that got Ignatius to second guess whether his patterns of imitation were the right idea. The second point, though, and the more, I think, hopeful point, is that it was his willingness to just slow down, pay attention to the dynamics of his own heart that allowed him to ultimately come to the recognition, no, what I deeply desire is to serve a different master, not like the knights of old, but to serve God, and ultimately to give my life in service to others, thereby beginning a new story. So it seems to me that question of whom we imitate is indeed a rather consequential one. Let me just pause on that and suggest the following. I'll come back to some practical things at the end, but for now, let me just suggest the following. You are at a place that is going to lift up for you examples of people worth imitating. And my challenge to you is to give some time and space to considering what those examples of people might suggest for you. Why? Well, because, again, what I said earlier is that we're trying, I think, to ignite in you not the things that you desire right now, but the things that you will desire that are perhaps buried more deeply within you. Is it to be part of healing people? Is it to be part of educating people? Is it to fix some of the world's problems? Is it to help address climate change? Is it to build the next AI model that transforms any number of things? Is it to advance the frontiers of medicine or technology or business or economics or whatever? I think you'll all agree with me that if you were asked to do those things right now, you might not have all the tools just yet. But I would be prepared to wager that as a consequence of your experience here at this university, you will have been equipped to identify those desires and the means by which to pursue them with great, great passion. And one thing I can say with great certainty, I too am an alumnus of a Jesuit university. There are a lot of us around the planet. And I think what we have in common is that experience of having been invited into that process of coming to understand ourselves, our desires, the good we hope to effect in the world. You're not alone in this. Find those conversation partners. Find those people who are worth imitating. Let me come back to Ignatius for a moment and suggest an image that comes from his kind of major work, the Spiritual Exercises. There's a moment in this period, and by the way, if you're not familiar, the Spiritual Exercises is basically a retreat manual. It's a manual for those that are going to make a 30-day retreat, or a retreat that might last even over many, many weeks, living in everyday life. But in the midst of this, he proposes a couple of exercises, and this one he describes as the two standards exercise. And in this context, a standard is a flag. So you almost have to imagine two armies on the sides of a battlefield about to charge into battle. And his question effectively is, whose side are you on? So he wants us to imagine, where are we prepared to really give our lives, our attention, our energies, our passions, for what? So I'm slightly adapting this, and I'm going to suggest to you two images that correspond to these two standards. Image 1. What is your heart's desire? Does it look more like that? Now, the answer, by the way, may very well be, well, kind of, yeah. I'm going to say a little bit, perhaps something surprising. I'm choosing not to go the too moralistic route here, okay? I'm going to say the following. Maybe that's okay. Okay? Maybe that's okay. I mean, if your objective is, yeah, I really would like to make piles of money. Now, it happens that I happen to teach a number of students that, in fact, have gone on to do that and intend to go on and do that. So my caveat to them is, okay, great, be very good at what you do it ethically, do it well, do it competently, don't step on people, but if you're going to make the money, do good with it. All right, so standard 1, let's say a focus on just, I'm working and I hope to make money on it. The second image is meant to be a little bit provocative, and you'll see that it sort of resembles the first image. And the rhetorical question here is, what really drives you? What is at the heart of your striving? And this second image is a modern take on a sort of traditional Catholic devotion known as the Sacred Heart. This particular image by a Latino artist, and just, I think, captures it in just a beautiful way. And I think if I'm reading this image right, it's suggesting something rather different from the image on the left. That if we go the route of Ignatius, okay, if we follow the basic logic of what Ignatius himself was doing, then this second image is ultimately one that is going to be more satisfying. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, certainly in the language of this devotion, Jesus' own heart is so rooted in the desire to serve people, those whom he loves, that he will go to whatever length, even to death, to save those that he loves. So this second image is meant to call to mind a rather different rhetorical question, which might look something like this: for whom might you want to hand over your life, your efforts, your passions? And I realize that at this stage, this might be rather abstract. The easy answer might be, well, I do it for my family, or I do it for, the people that are close to me. You might not even know who the people are. I always challenge my seniors by saying, all this, may seem somewhat obvious to you. Maybe you're in a relationship, maybe it's your family, but there may even be human beings that don't even exist yet that you would do this for, okay? And I'm speaking here to the fellow parents in the room. That at some point, many of you who are freshmen, may have children, and this image will be enormously meaningful to you, in the sense that, of course, I would give everything for their good. But here's where I want to leave this for the moment. The question, what would it be like to be so passionate about the work that you do and the type of person that you are willing to give of yourself for the good of another, even if it is at great cost to yourself? Now, that said, let me kind of return to where you are right now. You're in your first year, you're in your first several weeks. So all this may seem rather vague. You're in your first several weeks of your experience here as a student. There's a lot that you're still figuring out. the names of the people on your floor, who's going to go to the dining hall with you, how do you get from, class A to class B in the time that you've got, when are you going to get to the gym, what should I try out for, what clubs should I sign up for, who are going to be my people. And some of you are probably, if you're at all like my own kids, I have a freshman now, I've got a junior, and I have one that just graduated last year. If you're like my kids, there might be a lot of self-doubt that's embedded in that. There might be some sense of, I haven't found my people yet, I don't know if I belong here, I'm not sure if this is going to work out, a lot of these kinds of questions. So I'll come back to my observation, kind of piggybacking on what those ancient Greeks observed so many years ago, that we are complex creatures, that we're not obvious, that our many motivations can sometimes be at cross purposes. We can be, as St. Augustine observes in his Confessions, mysteries unto ourselves. So my question to you is, have you ever had that experience? Don't raise your hand. But have you ever had that experience where you say something and then you're like, why did I say that? Or you do something and you're like, why did I do that? To experience yourself as a mystery. Conversely, have you had the experience of accomplishing something and saying to yourself, I can't believe I did that. Like, that was awesome. Or being presented with a challenge, maybe even by one of your professors, rising to it and then just being like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Moments of self-realization, moments that hint at the promise of selving. So this next image I want to share with you, it's on the campus of one of our sister Jesuit institutions, Fairfield University in Connecticut. And this really beautiful, remarkable pair of statues done by a couple of young artists installed just a handful of years ago. And you may see, if you're close, that at the base, the name of it, Examine, indicates what it's about. This is a representation of Ignatius of Loyola, and specifically in the act of doing what he counseled his fellow Jesuits to do, this daily practice of self-reflection known as the Examine. And what's striking to me about this image, this is a practice that's undertaken by Jesuits around the world and by many lay people, myself included, that is, at some level, a practice of just self-knowledge, or in the words that I put at the top there, self-appropriation, literally making myself my own, coming to deeper understanding of this complex being that I am, trying to overcome the mystery that sometimes I am to myself. Let me show you some detail from this statue. I want you to just observe the way that they have depicted Ignatius gazing into the face of Ignatius. Because at the end of the day, who's going to know him better than himself? And who's going to know you better than yourself? But the thing that particularly strikes me in this detail is that this is not a passive gaze. This is not somebody who's kind of like, hey, sup, what's for lunch? This is somebody who is transfixed, that is doing the work of self-knowledge. If you'll permit me, I'm going to go professory on you for about 30 seconds. Aristotle writes in his Nicomachean Ethics that the virtuous life, is rooted in something that in his Greek word is energeia, a being at work, is my favorite way of translating that work. A being at work in accord with virtue is the way that he writes it. And what he means by that, and the reason I find this compelling even in this context, is that Aristotle recognized, 2,400 years ago, that the work of living is not a spectator sport. It is an active engagement because we are complex creatures, because we can be mysteries unto ourselves. So here you are at the University of Scranton. You are going through your now, fairly routine habit of going through classes. You wake up, you go to the dining hall, you go back to your room, you go to your classes, you do your homework, you go to your activities, you go to your sports, you go to your whatever it is you're doing, rinse, repeat. Okay, so you've gotten into your habit, you've gotten into your routine. But I hope that along the way, even maybe at this point, what you're recognizing is that the work of doing that is not just about the routine. It's not just about the just kind of check the boxes, just kind of do what you're told to do, get it over with. I hope that on some level you're able to give yourself space for new insights. Perhaps new realizations about yourself and about what is possible. The image that you saw a minute ago is an Ignatius who sees in his own soul, his own self, something that he did not create, but that he receives in the belief that God has given it to him as gift to do something with. And the big question being, well, what is that something? When you're sitting in these seats, or ones very much like them, at your graduation day, what do you want to be feeling? What do you want to have accomplished? What do you want to have availed yourself of? Who will be those close to you? Those in your corner? Those who want you to succeed? Those who see your good? Those are all, I think, important questions. The practice of the examen is for Ignatius the regular maintenance of the soul that is capable of selving. The regular maintenance of the soul that is capable of selving. So a few more thoughts. I don't want to try your patience too much. I will suggest a few kind of vectors for your consideration. One from a book that I have read with my freshman students that came out just a little over a year ago. And you see the author, Roosevelt Montas, a Dominican-born scholar of Western literature, teaches at Columbia University, put out a really very smart book called Rescuing Socrates, in which he makes the observation about the kind of experience that you're having here at this university. I won't read the quote, but I'll just highlight that for him and for many of us that do the work that we do, it's ultimately about liberating you as human beings capable of selving in even more complex and beautiful ways as you undertake your experience here at the university. You're going to read a lot of hard things. You're going to write papers you don't want to write. You're going to be challenged by your professors. You're going to be held to high standards. But one thing I'll remind you of is that you are in a community of people, and many of them are here, who have spent a lifetime trying to get their hands around very difficult ideas and want desperately to be able to share what they have learned with you. So one of the resources that you should avail yourself of is your professors. Go to their office hours, get to know them, ask them hard questions. They are your allies. So that's one point for your consideration. A second point for your consideration. Take your leisure seriously. The image, again, on, oh, I see it, there are mirrors. That's what it is, okay. The image on the left is from an engraving, and it is meant to depict a acedia. And I know almost nobody in this room knows what that word means. It's sometimes translated as sloth. It's one of the 7 deadly sins. But notice the kind of comparison there to the image on the right. There's a big difference between leisure and entertainment. We live in a world of a lot of entertainment, but leisure is a different way of being at work, coming back to Aristotle's distinction. I have on the slide here a quote from 20th century philosopher Josef Pieper. And again, I won't read it, but the basic takeaway is what he has at the end there, that if we are incapable of leisure, we're incapable of being at home with ourselves. We are incapable of selving. So leisure is serious business, all right? It is not the passive scrolling through TikTok. It is not the, more or less, mindless kinds of things that we tend to do, myself included, from time to time. So often meditated or mediated, I should say, by screens. Leisure is ultimately about the work of building ourselves. So one of the challenges that I'll get to very shortly is that you find ways of doing that kind of soul building in conversation, in contemplation, in active leisure. I think that's an important skill to learn. A third one, practicing care. To discover in yourself the capacity to be loving towards another person can be enormously liberating. To discover in yourself gift, to discover in yourself the willingness to reach others, particularly in times of need or in times of suffering. And to find times to discover that. And fourthly, kinship. As the former speaker at this very event, Greg Boyle, has written about so eloquently in his works. And the idea most central to his writing being about expanding our notion of the people with whom we have kinship. So let me conclude with 5 challenges. And these are kind of more in the category of, I'm standing between you and your active leisure. I get it. Okay, I'll wrap it up. Yeah. Okay, I get it. Oh, that's nice. That's very kind. Thank you. Are they kidding? So the first one, you have it right there. practice real friendship and conversation. Okay, this I mean is a challenge. I observe this, and I know many of your faculty observe this as well. We're all recovering from COVID, okay, and many of you in similar ways. But to actually take advantage of the fact that you're in a community of people that are capable of caring for one another, discover the wells of care within yourself. Be capable of reaching out in friendship to others, and watch the magic happen. That's all I'll say about that one. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge, backwards. Second challenge, find times and places for contemplation. What do I mean? I would be tempted to say, learn how to pray. I don't disagree with that thesis, but what I'm talking about here is actually much more fundamental. Times and places for contemplation. How about this? You don't have to always be busy. It is the endemic challenge on every campus I've ever been on to always be busy. I'm saying actively resist that. I'm saying that contemplation, which I take to mean, in the words of the Jesuit theologian Walter Burghardt, a long, loving look at the real, a willingness to see the world as it is, to not engage in mindless, frenetic activity, but to slow down, to see yourself, to see others, to encounter a text, to behold a painting, to speak with a stranger, to minister to a child, whatever it is, whatever it slows you down, enables you to see the world with open eyes. That's what I'm referring to. College is a wonderful time for that, I think, challenge. Third, and this is from what I was saying earlier, listen to those worth imitating. And again, there are many in this room, all right? But there are also figures that you will encounter through what you read, through what you do. Those who have the great ideas, the poets, the scientists, the nurses, the social workers, and so on, and so on, and so on. Those whose lives are worth imitating. And again, one of the great things I think about just being in an environment like this one is you will see them in spades. They're going to be constantly put before you. You're going to read them. You're going to practice what they've taught. It's a fantastic experience. Allow yourself to be shaped by that. And again, remember that sometimes the chisel hurts, but what emerges is a more authentic self. Fourth, serve especially those who cannot reciprocate. Learn what it means to be capable of giving of yourself to others. I think that one is fairly straightforward. And lastly, nourish your inner life. You are a complex being. You are not simply a bundle of nerves and stimulus and response. You are capable of mystery. Do not be afraid to discover it. Do not be afraid to search after it. Imitate those that open up for you new avenues of discovery. And yes, perhaps, allow yourself to engage in prayer. So, 5 challenges. My final word to you is that I hope you take advantage of every opportunity that you have. You're in a wonderful institution. You're among some very enthusiastic people who I hope will continue to be amped up, which is awesome. I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Muldoon, for your book and for your lecture. And thank you all for coming. And Byron, come say goodnight to your mama.